anybody comes up with it, I'd love to know.
It could be your Google search page. What about things like going to the bathroom? I mean, so every class has a little bit different. Sometimes in my middle school, they had to have their agenda book, and then we would write a pass for them to go to the bathroom. When I was in middle school myself, one of my teachers made us carry a toilet seat to go to the bathroom. Yeah, that was really embarrassing. So you really never asked to go to the bathroom in science class. But I guess it was an effective behavior management tool. But, so what's appropriate? Some people are okay with the students just getting up if the pass is there. Some people are okay with the students just getting up and getting the pass and going to the bathroom. Others say, no, you have to ask. Everybody has a different way. So you have to teach the students, how do I go to the bathroom? How do I ask to go to the bathroom? Other routines could be, what do you do with the homework when you come in? Do you want it out on the desk? Do you want it put into a place? What goes on? What happens when you enter a classroom? Do you want students to go right to their desks and sit down? Do you want them to get their pencils sharpened? Do you want them to have all their materials out? Do they have a warm-up they need to do right away? So some of these are procedures that need to be taught very early in the year. Trying to think if there's anything else. How to sharpen a pencil is always one that I did. Lining up for the fire drill is usually one. We had code red and code blue too, so we had those. I don't know, do you guys have hurricane drill or tornado drills here? Yeah. Okay. So those are kinds of things that you practice. That's not something we had in Buffalo or Maryland, so not something I did.
I think I've noticed this year, especially in my building, because of Pinterest, so many people have had these awesome ideas now that they're using, and then they're sharing them with everyone within the building. So this really helped, I think, a lot.
Pinterest is fantastic.
And I personally am not on it, but I get all my ideas from everybody else.
Yeah, there are a lot of teaching ideas on Pinterest and management ideas, so if you're not on Pinterest, it's a good place to find resources. If you are on Pinterest, you know where to find them. So in addition to establishing your routines, you also need to establish your consequences, both positive and negative. We often say consequences to mean negative, but consequences can be positive. It could be that if I do my homework on time, I get full credit for it. That's a positive consequence. So we need to make sure that we're responding to appropriate and inappropriate behavior. Natural consequences are something that I personally really like. So natural consequences are consequences that occur naturally within an environment, and it's not artificially created to change behavior. So a natural consequence could be that if I interrupt somebody, they're going to be upset with me and maybe let me know, or maybe they won't talk to me again. That's a natural consequence. A natural consequence of not doing your homework is you don't get any credit for it. Oh, and on here I have fire. If you get too close, you get burned. But an artificial consequence would be getting time out when you got too close to a fire. The consequence doesn't logically flow from the behavior.
I find using the word consequence can be difficult because parents use the word consequence when we mean intervention, and we're wanting them to use a positive intervention. Then we're using the word intervention, but they're using the word consequence to mean the same thing. And then you have to sort of educate them on between those two.
Yeah, sometimes parents really aren't sure what consequence means, and so you have to have a little talk about what are consequences and how do they apply. And then if they're getting it confused with intervention, then
they particularly use consequence if it means punishment.
Yes.
Or, you know, hurting the child in some way because they've gone beyond the point of wanting to teach to wanting to harm the child because they're frustrated with the child.
Oh. That's definitely a challenge. So probably it's just talking with them and educating them about what consequences really are, that it's the result of any behavior and whether it could be positive or negative. But I mean, I think a lot of teachers do that too, because we say consequences and automatically the thought is it's negative.
Exactly.
I mean, that just, for some reason, that's the connotation that's associated with the word, but consequence itself is not.
Well, even the sign language often is punishment. So the sign for punishment would be C for consequence, so even in sign language it implies a punishment.
I sign consequence differently.
How do you sign it?
I sign consequence. Consequence. So it's like the behavior and then what happens after. Yeah, or consequence, but I do consequence. Yeah, so that's a very interesting, I've never seen consequence signed like that. So that definitely would give you the impression that it's a very negative thing. Yeah. Do other people sign consequence like that? Yeah? Oh, okay. That must be a regional sign. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Yeah, I sign consequence because it's whatever the behavior is, and then what happens after, that's the consequence. Thank you for sharing. I learned something new. As with rules, the consequences are best developed with the students because you want the students to buy in. You really want them to want whatever incentives it is that you're giving them. So it's nice if you can develop it with the students. And when we're talking about consequences, there's several different types. The first is positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement means that the consequence causes an increase in the behavior's occurrence. Okay, it doesn't matter whether the behavior is positive or negative, it doesn't matter. That reinforcement causes an increase in the behavior, is positive reinforcement. And then there's two different sub-levels there. You have primary reinforcers, which have biological importance to an individual. So that could be like food or shelter or something that lets me continue living. And then you have secondary reinforcers, which don't have any biological importance. So that could be, you know, a grade. Negative reinforcement means the behavior increases in occurrence to avoid getting a punishment. So you've threatened me with something that I don't want. I want to avoid getting that punishment. I'm going to increase whatever the behavior is. Again, it could be positive or negative, because a negative reinforcer would be if I don't want to work and I throw a fit, and then I don't have to work anymore. So, and if I get removed from the classroom, I don't have to work anymore. Therefore, I'm going to continue throwing a fit and getting thrown out of the classroom. So that's a negative reinforcer because I'm trying to avoid doing my work. It's always really hard to remember that because we want to think that positive reinforcement means good behavior improves and negative reinforcement means bad behavior. But it's not like that. It is why the behavior improves. So positive reinforcement, the behavior improves because I want to get something. Negative reinforcement, the behavior improves because I want to avoid something. Punishment is a consequence that is designed to decrease a behavior's occurrence. So it's still a consequence, but I'm trying to decrease a behavior that I don't want. Those first three are actually types of consequences. This last one, satiation, is a really important thing to keep in mind. I don't know if I said that right, satiation. I don't know, it's after lunch. So basically what it means is that the student has received the reinforcement to the point that it's no longer reinforcing. So there's no more incentive for them to continue behaving in an appropriate way. So that's something that happened with us with the PBIS, is that sometimes our students were just satisfied with the merits that they got, and they weren't motivated to continue earning more merits because they were sated. Are there any questions on these?
Could you give an example, another example of negative reinforcement, like in the classroom?
Let me think about a consequence I wouldn't want. So, maybe you have told me that if I interrupt you one more time, you're going to call my parents. I don't want you to call my parents, so I am going to increase my behavior of not interrupt, or yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm not going to interrupt you because I want to avoid that behavior. So sorry. Let's start again. You said you're tired of me interrupting you. I keep interrupting you. You're like, hey, if you do it one more time, I'm calling your parents. That's it. I do not want you to call my parents, so I will not interrupt you anymore. So it's an increase in my positive behavior of not interrupting.
Punishment?
Punishment means he actually calls my parents. So if I do interrupt him and he calls my parents, then it becomes punishment.
Also, punishment causes behavior to go down, not up. It's really important because I like to think of the seatbelt. To get you to fasten your seatbelt, they put an adversary stimulus in your car. So to take away something to cause the behavior to go up, which is the negative reinforcement. See how it works? Yeah, the dinging of the bell.
Oh, okay.
To cause the behavior to go up, they put the dinging bell in there. And the only way to get that, to get your behavior to go up, is to stop the bell. So that's a good example of a negative reinforcement.
Thank you. I often think, maybe you buckle up because you don't want to get pulled over by the police too. That's negative reinforcement. If I buckle up, police are not going to pull me over. So I'm avoiding that behavior or avoiding that consequence, which I don't want. Guidelines for creating consequences. The consequences need to be clear and specific. They really should relate in the purpose to, they should relate to the purpose, the rules, and the routines in your classroom. You really want something that fits in really well with your classroom climate. You don't want something that is maybe so negative or so bad that students don't feel comfortable anymore, but you want to just make sure that whatever consequences you set up philosophically blend in. I generally tend to prefer natural and logical consequences, so things that just sort of flow from one another, such as if I do my homework, then I get full credit for it, or if I don't do my homework, then I'm not going to get credit for it. I mean, it's like that. Now, sometimes it's not easy to give you a natural or logical consequence, so that's when you have to be a little more creative. Especially when you have students who maybe aren't getting. Sometimes you think like peer pressure is really going to help with students, that, oh, if I give the whole class, I tell them everybody is good for the whole period, then they'll earn 10 minutes of free time at the end. And you know that you have that one student who might just wreck it for everybody, and so you kind of hope that the peer pressure will make that student behave, but it really doesn't. That would be sort of that would be a natural consequence that maybe doesn't always work, so then you have to resort to artificial consequences. when you have to deliver a consequence, it's really important to make sure that you apply it consistently so that if you say the next person who interrupts me is going to lose a point for today, then you have to do it for everybody. Or the next person who gets up and sharpens their pencil is going to have to stay for lunch. You have to make sure you apply that consistently to everybody, whether it's the student who's the perfect angel in your class or the student who is not. For negative consequences, it's important to be firm, but not be angry. And sometimes when we're in the heat of the moment, it is so easy to be angry and just yell at them and let them know what the consequence is going to be. But really, it's important to be very firm and let them know why the behavior is inappropriate and what the consequence is going to be, but not to be angry about it. And that leads to the next one. It's really important to link the consequence and the behavior. So you are getting this consequence because you did this, and be very explicit. And especially for lower functioning students and for younger students, it's really important that the consequence occur as soon as possible after the behavior. One that is kind of hard to do sometimes is not to accept excuses, whining, or bargaining. But, oh no, my mom is going to kill me. I'm going to lose my birthday party. Those kinds of things. It's really important that we're consistent with this. You knew that this was the consequence, and this is what's going to happen. I actually had a student, every day she walked in chewing gum. And every day she got a consequence. Finally, I said, you know what? You come in with gum in your mouth tomorrow, and you're just having detention because clearly what I'm doing is not working. The next day, she walked in, she had gum in her mouth, she got detention, and then I got an angry letter from her grandmother calling me all kinds of names. But I was very clear, she knew exactly what the consequence was, and she wasn't happy, but it didn't really matter. She still had to have that consequence. And again, you need to be educative and not vindictive. So when we're talking about some application things, it's important to engage in some reinforcer sampling. So ask the students what they want to earn. Candy isn't always a good idea, and some schools actually prohibit giving out any kind of junk food. So even though the students may say they want it, that may be something that you're not allowed to do, so just be careful with that. Sometimes being too open-ended can be a backfire because maybe they'll be like, I want an iPad, I want a car, I want, $1 million. So maybe putting it within limits. And then also to make sure that reinforcers are age appropriate. I was actually pretty surprised in middle school that they still wanted stickers. It never occurred to me that middle schoolers would want stickers, but boy, do they. Maybe in 8th grade, not so much. But just making sure that the things are things students actually want. I think probably high school is less. Although today on Facebook, I did have a friend who complained about not getting her I voted sticker. And she says, that's right, I'm back in 3rd grade now. So I don't know, stickers never get old. So it's also good to provide a choice of reinforcers or rotate them around so that you avoid the students getting satiated with or sated with all of the reinforcers. You want to make sure that they continue behaving appropriately to get the reinforcers. And really, really important, make the reinforcer contingent. You need to work with parents to promote consistency. I once sat in a meeting with a student who was having some serious behavior problems. And his dad was in the meeting with us. And he was like, well, if you behave for a week, I'll buy you that new pair of sneakers you want. And the kid was like, no, 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 you buy me the sneakers and then I'll behave. And the dad goes, yes. At which point, I mean, I just wanted to fall under the table because I would have never been able to say no to my mom. And there was no way that I would have gotten shoes before I behaved appropriately. So I was really shocked that this dad said yes. But the principal then kind of stopped the meeting and said, no, let's talk about this a little bit. So working with parents is really important because sometimes they really want to cave. And when we're talking about kids who have disabilities or kids who are deaf, there's still some of that grieving going on, and oh, my poor little baby, oh, and they just give them everything. So we need to really educate parents about we need to be firm and we need to be consistent. And they need to do the behavior before they get the reinforcement. Often we have to start with the tangible reinforcements. Students don't have the intrinsic motivation to behave, so we have to start with something that's really tangible that they really want. But we need to really kind of help move students towards building the intrinsic motivation. So with the tangible motivation or tangible reinforcer, it's nice if we can pair it with a social reinforcer so that eventually maybe we can do away with the tangible and just have the social. Token reinforcers are pretty popular. Token reinforcers are symbolic representation for a reinforcer. When you introduce it to students, you need to tell them what behavior is required to get the reinforcer, how much it costs, how they can access it, how often. Maybe you start with every day, you move to every week, you move to every 2 weeks, something so that they don't become reliant on it. And then, like I used to pass out dollars, but if students know how to access a copy machine, they can counterfeit it. So maybe you need to find a way to prevent students from counterfeiting your, whatever your token is. Some ideas for social reinforcers could be body language. It could be, that you're exuding some sort of positive energy toward the person. You have to be a little bit careful sometimes, depending on your situation, but sometimes like a pat on the back is good or a high five is good so that you're giving some sort of social reinforcer. Proximity, being near the person maybe lets them know, I'm here, I support what you're doing. Giving them privileges, so maybe, if you behave, a reinforcer could be that you get to be the person who runs to the office and does an errand for me, or you get to make the copies or something. And then words and phrases. As always, the praise should be contingent, so if you do something good, then you get some words of praise. It should be very specific to a behavior, so I really like how you just sat down quietly. And it should sound sincere. I talked a little bit about contracts earlier. So having contracts helps you to track the behavior. It should be negotiated between the teacher, the student, and the parent. And the contract should include the behavior, the conditions, what are the criteria for reinforcement, so whether they need to have 20 out of 25 stars, and then what is the actual reinforcer? Maybe they earn ice cream, maybe they earn free time. I always like the KISS principle for designing interventions, so keeping it very simple. Four ways to do this. Use a specific, we're talking now about decreasing problem behavior. So you can use a specific schedule of reinforcement to decrease the behaviors. If they occur too often or too quickly for you to really reinforce appropriately, you could say every 5 minutes you will either reinforce or not. Deliver the reinforcer when the target behavior is not performed. So if the student is not performing it, so if they're often just up and moving around or doing whatever it is you don't want them to do, the moment that they do the behavior that you want, then you can reinforce them. Replacement behaviors are always good. So if you want students to, I'm trying to think right now. I'm feeling a little time pressured, so that means that now I'm going to be blanking. Oh, if you want students to be talking about things that are, if you want them to be on task, then and they're often off task, then you want to make it impossible for them to be off task. I can't think of an example right now. It'll come to me.
Replacement behavior, if you want an example of
Thank you.
It would be like, for example, a kid that's tapping on the table, you want to replace that behavior with an object that would be quiet enough for them to handle in their hands while you're teaching them.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a perfect example. All right, so we will skip that in the interest of time. Have some little scenarios so you can think about how to work in those situations. I will give you a couple minutes, though, to add to your notes because we did do a lot now, so you can have a little processing time. You can't have too much processing time. Sorry. Okay, so the next thing is we're talking about individualized plans. So talking about identifying the tough kids. Some of this we've already gone through. So a tough kid is a student who has behavioral excesses and deficits. So maybe they're showing too many of certain behaviors or not enough of certain behaviors. They're too aggressive or they don't have enough social skills. Some examples of behavioral excesses and deficiencies. How do we know that somebody is truly a tough kid? These are the things that we did this morning. Clearly define the behavior, collect the data, analyze the data. Oops, yeah. And then we have all this data, and now we want to design a behavior intervention plan. And there's 3 things that a BIP must be. It must be proactive, so what environmental adjustments can you make to make that behavior unnecessary? It should be educative, so you want to teach appropriate behaviors in place of the inappropriate behaviors. And it should be effective, so you want to manage your consequences, so you're increasing positive outcomes and decreasing the problem behaviors. And then this section comes from Riffle's 2007 work. I can't remember her first name, but I believe she's from this area. So proactive plans, you're adjusting the environment, so you're reducing the likelihood of the problem behavior occurring, so having lots of active learning. I'm sorry, you've been sitting a lot this afternoon. That would be my poor planning. You want to allow the student to be as independent and successful as possible. This goes back to choice theory. If people have the opportunity to make choices for themselves, then they feel a little more, they have more buy-in to what the activity or the action will be. Again, you want to teach replacement skills. You want to build generalized competencies. So maybe I know that when I'm in this classroom, this is how I behave, but when I go to somebody else's classroom, I just totally behave in a different way. That's not generalizing the behaviors that they've learned, so they need to learn in every class, this is what I should be doing. And increasing independence. In effective plans, we're really thinking about what are the consequences that we're delivering, what kinds of reinforcements, when, how, really making it efficient to increase behaviors quickly. And then this is a little model, but I have a better example. So Zoe likes to moo with the teacher when she's not working with her right now. She doesn't get any work done on her own. So what's our target behavior? Mooing. Yes. And the antecedent? Why is she mooing? Yeah, she wants some attention from the teacher. And so what's the function of the behavior for her? She's getting the teacher's attention, and she's not getting her work done. And so here's some possible interventions. So you could tell Zoe that maybe I'm not available, I'm helping this person right now. You could do the yellow pages, look at the yellow pages, find your friend. 1, 2, 3, then me. So some strategies. And then I think that I might just stop right there. So last chance for any burning questions or comments. And one final thing for you is that if you want to learn more, we do have, actually it's this spring, I have a 3-credit classroom management course. It's totally online. It's all graduate student level. And also in the summer of next year, I'll be teaching I think it's a preventing problem behaviors course, also online. So I'm not coming back to Chicago that I know of, but I'm accessible online. And I also have some little flyers if you are interested in either that course. There's also one on Homeschool Continuum, so if you're interested in learning more about collaborating with families, that's on the back side. Otherwise, thank you very much for having me today.